Today I want to share with you how to make a no-knead sourdough bread using the stretch and fold method. This technique is very easy to do and is especially helpful to anyone who has struggled in the past with dense no-knead sourdough breads. The stretch and fold technique is going to create a much lighter and delightfully airy bread. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nourishing foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. I just want to quickly add that if at any time you want to jump ahead in this video, I'll have the chapter timestamps in the description below, and I'll also have a link there to the printable recipe. Now let's go over the ingredients for making this bread. You're going to need 3 cups of flour, which we're going to talk about in detail in a minute. You're going to need 1 1/4 cups of water, room temperature is fine. You're going to need 1 cup of a well-fed starter, and you're going to need 1 1/2 teaspoons of a fine ground salt. I'm going to be using a fine ground sea salt. Now to make this no-knead sourdough bread, you can use all-purpose flour or you can use bread flour, and both of these are commonly found at most grocery stores. All-purpose flour and bread flour both are milled from modern-day whole wheat. The only difference is they're just different types of modern-day whole wheat. The one that's made into bread flour has a higher protein or higher gluten, and gluten is what helps give bread a nice structure, a nice rise. And that's why the flour with more gluten, more protein, is called bread flour, because it's made for making bread. But all-purpose flour, as the name implies, it's all-purpose, can also work. But what these two types of flour have in common, all-purpose flour and bread flour, is that all of the bran and the germ that's contained in the whole wheat, the whole grain, has been sifted out. Now, you can also use all-purpose spelt flour or all-purpose einkorn flour. Spelt and einkorn are ancient grains, and they've become very common today, and you can often find a whole grain spelt flour or a whole grain einkorn flour for sale, but you may also find an all-purpose spelt flour or an all-purpose einkorn flour. And these ancient grains, these ancient wheats, when they're sold in their all-purpose form, have also had the bran and the germ sifted out of them. Now, overall, spelt and einkorn contain less gluten. So if you decide to use all-purpose spelt flour or all-purpose einkorn flour, you can also consider adding in some vital wheat gluten if gluten agrees with you. Sometimes people choose to use the ancient grains because they are a little lower in gluten, although not gluten-free. That's important to note. But you can add a little vital wheat gluten into your flour to help boost the gluten and help boost the rise of making a no-knead sourdough spelt boule or making a no-knead sourdough einkorn boule. So I just wanted to give you that little overview so that you understand the difference between different types of flours. But using any type of all-purpose flour or bread flour works very well when making a sourdough bread. Now you can certainly use any flour that you buy at your local grocery store, but what I like to do is actually store the whole grain and then grind my flour fresh. And I generally like to use spelt or sometimes einkorn, but I find spelt a very good all-purpose flour. I'll use my muck mill to grind my spelt grain, and then I'll use a baker's sifter like this, and these are very common. You can probably find them at a local kitchen store. They're also sold online at places like Breadtopia and King Arthur Flour. I've also seen them on Amazon, and they come in a different grades in terms of how tight the mesh is. They usually have numbers associated with them like 40, 50, 60, and those numbers indicate how tight this mesh is. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll grind my grain, and then if I want to turn my flour into what I can do as close as possible to an all-purpose flour, I'll put it in this sifter and I'll sift out as much bran and germ as I can. Now, do I get it as good as a commercially sifted flour? No. I think of it more as my old world flour. There probably is a little bit of bran and germ left in there, but primarily at least 3/4 of it is sifted out. Often what I'll do if I know I'm going to be doing a lot of baking, I'll grind a good amount of grain, and then I will sift out as much bran and germ as I can, and then I'll just decant it into a glass jar like I have here with a nice good tight airtight seal. Now, generally I don't keep a lot of whole grain flour on hand in its flour form because the bran and the germ can go rancid and give your flour an off flavor. However, this has had the bulk of the bran and the germ sifted out of it, and I'm definitely going to use this well within 6 months, which is sort of my cutoff when it comes to storing whole grain flour. Some people feel that it does stay fresh for a year. I like to primarily use my whole grain flour up within 6 months. Now this is technically my all-purpose version, but I do know that it does have a little bit of bran and germ left in it, because even if you do home sift it, and I have a video where I go through this in a lot of detail where I'm grinding grain and sifting it to different consistencies, one where I sift out about 1/4 of the bran and the germ, and then another where I sift out as much bran and germ as I can, and that's what I've got here. So this is my version of a spelt all-purpose flour, and that's what I'm going to be using to make my bread. And I'm just using the all-purpose spelt flour. I'm not adding anything else to it, so in the event that you also at home may not have the Vital Wheat gluten, you don't need to worry about it. You can see basically what a no-knead sourdough bread using an all-purpose flour, and in this case an all-purpose spelt flour, is going to look like. Chances are, if you're using an all-purpose flour from the grocery store or a bread flour that's been commercially sifted, you're probably going to get even a slightly better rise than I'm going to get. Now I want to mention, I did a lot of research before I bought my mock mill, and I did buy this. The company did not give this to me. I bought this after a lot of research, and I'm so happy with it. For a grain mill, it's reasonably priced. It's a stone grinding grain mill, and it's just a workhouse. I have the smaller one, the 100. It's perfect for my family size. I've been very happy with it. And I liked it so much, I contacted the mock mill company and I asked them, could you give a discount to my viewers if they wanted to buy a grain mill? And they were very generous to do so. And so be sure to check the description underneath this video because I'll have a link to my shopping guide where you can find the discount code if you ever decide you want to buy a mock mill grain mill. I highly recommend it. Also, when you're over at my shopping guide, I have a lot of discount codes for all sorts of things that are perfect for the Traditional Foods Kitchen. And it also allows you to save some money if there are things you need. Now, I've got 1 cup of my all-purpose spelt flour in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and get my other 2 cups. And I'm just, scooping it and then just leveling it off. I'm not doing anything fancy. Now, to my flour, I'm going to go ahead and add in my salt, 1.5 teaspoons. Now, there are different schools of thought on this. Some people, when they're using yeast or a sourdough starter, prefer to allow the sourdough starter, the water, and the flour to just go through what's known as an autolyse, if I'm pronouncing that properly, autolyse property or procedure, without the salt added in. I actually think the proper pronunciation may be autolyse. You'll have to put it down in the comments for me phonetically. You know I'm the queen of mispronunciation. But in any event, I like to mix my salt right in with the flour. I don't notice a huge difference. Some people prefer to allow as I said, the flour, the water, and the sourdough starter to go through the autolyse process together, but without the salt, and then knead the salt into the dough after that autolyse process. I really, to be honest with you, I don't notice a big difference. And I also often wonder, am I getting the salt kneaded in well? So I don't worry about it, and I just go ahead and mix it right into the flour. I do make sure that I mix it in well and there are no clumps of salt. And I'm using my magic whisk. You know, I love this little thing. It's such a good whisk. It does such a great job in whatever way you use it, and yet it's so small, but it works great. So I'm just going to get that salt mixed through, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now I'm just going to set that flour aside for a minute, and I'm going to get my water, and this is just room temperature water. I did use spring water. I find, you know, with anything that's under the fermentation umbrella, whether it's a vegetable ferment or in this case a sourdough, I do like to give anything that I'm doing that involves some sort of fermentation process the best start that it can get. And I prefer not to use water that has chlorine in it because I don't want to have anything in this fermentation process that may inhibit a successful fermentation. So that's just me. The same with my salt. I just use a sea salt. Any plain salt you have that doesn't contain anti-caking agents or other chemicals is probably a good bet to use whenever you're doing any type of fermentation. And speaking of salt, I have a discount code for you also when you're over at that shopping guide if you like the Redmond Real salt. And that's a perfect salt to use when making sourdough bread or vegetable ferments. Well, I fed my sourdough starter yesterday and it's nice and bubbly. And I'm going to go ahead and just pour in 1 cup right into my measuring cup here. Now my sourdough starter is one that a long time ago was originally started with rye flour, but over time I really just fed it with whatever I had, and so I just want to share that with you so that you know you can also feed your starter with whatever you have if you started it with rye flour. And the reason I often recommend starting your starter with rye flour is that rye flour is a little easier to get a sourdough starter going because rye flour contains things that the yeast really like to gobble up. So that's just a little tip. And I have videos where I show you how to make a sourdough starter with rye flour, as well as a sourdough starter just using plain all-purpose flour. And I'll be sure to link to those in the description. But in any event, I've got my 1 cup of fed starter here. And as I said, I fed this yesterday, but it's nice and bubbly and ready to go. And I'm just going to go ahead and pour this right into my 1 1/4 cup of water. What I'm going to do now is just mix the sourdough starter in the water until it's fully dissolved and incorporated. Now I'm just going to make a well in my flour, and I'm going to go ahead and pour in my water sourdough starter mixture. Now I'm going to mix this with my hands, and I've wet them to make the job very easy. You could also use a spatula or a Danish dough whisk if you've got one of those, but eventually you're going to need to get in there a little bit with your hands. So I've just wet them at the beginning, and I'm going to go ahead and mix this with my hands. Alrighty, now this is going to be a very wet, sticky dough. That's the characteristic of a good no-knead bread, whether it's a yeast-risen bread or a sourdough bread. And if at any time you feel the dough is sticking too much to your hands, simply wet your hands again. And if you find that your dough is very dry, you know, climate does play a role in all of this. And everybody's kitchen and everybody's climate is slightly different. You can add in a tablespoon at a time, or even a teaspoon of water, and see if that helps you get a good, nice, shaggy consistency. Now what we're going to do is cover this dough for 20 minutes, and we're just going to let it rest. This is the autolyse, if I'm saying that right, part of bread making. And this is where, the water and the flour and the sourdough starter and the salt, they just sort of all come together and relax a little, and the flour gets nicely saturated with the moisture. And so you just want to do this. Often you'll hear 30 minutes with a no-knead sourdough bread that has so much moisture to it. I find you really only need about 20 minutes, and then it's going to be very easy to handle. Well, we've let this rest for 20 minutes, and now what we're going to do is use the stretch and fold method, which can really help lighten your no-knead sourdough breads if you've found them to be dense in the past. Now, I like to use wet hands for this process, and the reason is, as I mentioned earlier, no-knead sourdough bread dough is on the wet and sticky side, shaggy as they say, and so I don't like to introduce a lot of flour. So I'm going to go ahead and use wet hands, and I think that this should work well. Now, with the stretch and fold method, what you're going to be doing is basically, as the name implies, you're going to stretch the dough up towards you, and then you're simply going to fold it over itself. Stretch and fold. Then all we're going to do is turn our bowl a quarter turn, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to, with our wet hands, we're going to stretch the dough up to us and fold it over itself. And then again, another turn. We're going to stretch the dough up to us, and we're going to fold it over itself. And then another quarter turn, and we're going to stretch our dough up towards us and fold it over itself. Then another quarter turn, and we're just going to end up where we started. And we're going to, one more time, we're going to stretch our dough up to us and fold it over. So that was a total of 5 stretch and folds. One at the 12 o'clock mark, one at the, 3 o'clock mark, one at the 6 o'clock mark, one at the 9 o'clock mark, and then another one when we got back to the 12 o'clock mark. Now we're going to cover our dough, and we're going to let this rest for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, we're going to do another stretch and fold. The first one we did with 5 stretch and folds is called a set. So we're going to do a total of 5 sets of stretch and fold. So one time around the bowl with 5 stretch and folds, wait 15 minutes. Another time, 5 times around the bowl, stretch and fold, wait 15 minutes. Another 5 times around the bowl, stretch and fold, wait 15 minutes. So far, that's 3 sets. Then you're going to do your 4th set, 5 times around the bowl of stretch and fold, wait 15 minutes, and then your final 5 times around the bowl of stretch and fold, and that's your 5th set. After your 5th set, your last stretch and fold set, then what you're going to do is coat your dough with a little bit of olive oil. That's what I like to do. And then you're going to cover it with plastic wrap, and you're going to set it aside to rest, the fermentation stage, for 12 hours. I like to do this in the evening because the fermentation process is going overnight, and then I can proceed with baking my bread in the morning. But if the reverse works for you, that's great too. But if this 12-hour schedule doesn't work for you, don't worry. You can cover this again doing the same process that we've done here with our stretch and folds, and then coat it with some olive oil, put some plastic wrap on top, set it aside for just 1 hour at room temperature. After 1 hour, put it in your refrigerator. You can leave this in your refrigerator anywhere from 18 to 24 hours. When you're ready to bake your bread, you're simply going to pull it out of your refrigerator, let it let it warm up to room temperature, and then proceed with the rest of the steps for baking your sourdough bread. However, if you find you're in a situation where you've gone past the 24 hours, please do not throw out your dough. It's going to work just fine using it to make a pizza dough or a focaccia or any sort of flatbread. After 24 hours, it's going to be more difficult to get a good rise out of it to make a boule, which is what we're going to make, one of those nice round sourdough breads. So know that you have some flexibility. You can do the 12 hours on the counter at room temperature, or you can do the 18 to 24 hours in your refrigerator. Well, I let this ferment overnight, and now I'm going to remove the plastic and show you that the dough has basically doubled in size. But now I don't want you to get concerned about, well, what exactly does doubled in size mean? I know a lot of times when you're a new baker, that can be somewhat confusing. Is it doubled in size? Is it not doubled in size? Basically, a trick that I'll tell you, what you're looking for is your dough to be slightly domed and basically looking like a little bit of a puffy pillow. The first thing you want to do is get some type of flat surface. I've just got a typical baking sheet here, and on that flat surface, put a piece of parchment paper and then dust it with flour and then set it aside. Then I'm going to reach in here, and you want to get a little bit of flour, not too much. Remember, this is a no knead. We want it to kind of be a wet dough, but a little bit of flour will help us to keep that sticky wet dough from sticking to our work surface. The next thing you want to do is remove your dough from your bowl and transfer it to your work surface. I really like doing this with a little plastic bench scrape. These are very reasonable. You can find them almost at any kitchen store, or probably in the aisle where they sell kitchen products at your grocery store. It's only a couple of dollars, and this works very well. Alternatively, you can wet your hands and scoop the dough out as well. But you'll see this bench scrape, look at how beautiful this looks. Look at how, see, it just takes it right out and kind of punches it down at the same time. Alrighty, now we're just going to transfer that right down onto our work surface. Perfect. Now you can use wet hands, or you can sprinkle your dough with a little bit of flour. I'm just going to use a little bit of flour. The dough is nice and wet, so I'm not too worried about the flour. If your dough seems a little more on the drier side, then use wet hands. And I'm just going to flour my hands a little too. What we want to do is just flatten this down. It's not difficult to do at all. Just flatten it until you get it about the size of like a piece of paper, about 8.5 by 11. Next, once you get it flattened out, you're basically pulling one side up and bringing it down into the middle. Then you're going to take your other side, the long end, and bring that up and over. Now you have your nice little folded letter. Now that I've got this nicely folded, I'm just going to flip it over, and then what I'm going to do is take my hands and cup this into the point where I can make it into a ball. So I'm just going to start working like this. And once I got that flipped over, I'm just continuing to just work it around until I get a nice smooth ball and a nice smooth top. And if you see any bubbles that appear, you can just press that air out. But basically what you're trying to do is just create a nice smooth top and some tension. Now we're going to use our bench scrape to lift this up and put it down onto our flat surface. That mine is with parchment paper and it's floured. Then I'm going to get a little flour out of here, and I'm just going to dust the top of this, and you'll see why in a minute. That'll be lovely. And then I'm going to take my dish towel and I'm going to cover this. And I'm just going to put this, whoops, it's sliding. I'm just going to put this right here. It's a nice, warm, cozy spot. I'm going to take my clean dish towel that's dusted with flour so nothing should stick, and I'm just going to cover this, and I'm going to let this rise for about an hour or two. How long this is going to take really depends on the temperature in your kitchen, the weather outside. There are so many factors involved when you're making bread, especially sourdough bread. But I'll keep an eye on this and check on it in an hour, maybe two. While your dough is rising, you want to get a Dutch oven with a lid and with a stainless steel knob or some type of knob that can withstand 500 degrees Fahrenheit in your oven. I know it can get confusing when people might say a 4-quart Dutch oven, 5-quart Dutch oven, 6-quart Dutch oven. I use between a 5-quart and a 6-quart Dutch oven, and basically mine measures, if I measure across the opening, measures 10 inches, so hopefully that'll help you. You want to place your Dutch oven with the lid on into your oven on the middle rack, and you want to preheat your oven with the Dutch oven in the oven at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want both your oven and the Dutch oven to become very hot. So you want to do this about 45 minutes before you're ready to bake your bread. Now, I know you may not know exactly if it's going to take an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours for your dough to rise, but just estimate best you can. If you wind up just heating it for 30 minutes or you wind up heating it for an hour, either way, it's going to work out okay. You just want to make sure that you have hit that 500 degrees Fahrenheit mark on your oven and your Dutch oven is in there and it's been in there for a while. Well, I let my dough rise for about an hour and a half. I felt that looked like it had about doubled in size. Now, again, I know the doubling in size, it can become a little confusing. You can always do something that's called a poke test, but I know that can be confusing as well. However, what you'll do if you want to do the poke test is take your finger and quickly stick it into your dough just up to the first knuckle. And you want to do it quickly. Stick it in, pull it out quickly. If the indentation stays where it is or starts to move back slowly, your dough is sufficiently proofed. If the dough springs back really fast, then it's not risen enough. And so what you want to do is give it about another 15 minutes or so. However, I want to say something about the poke test. I know it can be confusing to the new baker. Is it moving a little? Is it moving back quickly? And it can become a little overwhelming. And some will even say that if you do the poke test and the dough just stays still and isn't moving back slowly, your dough has overproofed. But it's not the end of the world. If you shape your dough, you put it on your parchment paper, and you give it somewhere between 1 hour to 2 hours to double, to what looks to the human eye double in size or about double in size, you're going to be fine. If it's a little overproofed, if it's a little underproofed, it's not going to make a significant difference in the long run. We're not professional bakers, we're home bakers. And a little bit one way or the other, as I said, isn't going to make a significant difference in the final product. All anyone is going to know is that you made homemade bread. Now what I'm going to do is go in here and just sprinkle the top of my dough here with some flour, and then I'm going to put a little flour carefully on my paring knife here. Now, you could just put this right into the oven as is and not worry about scoring it. It will crack in order to release steam, and it'll just crack in whatever pattern the bread decides it's going to crack. Or you can use a very sharp knife or something known as a lame, like pronounced like mom but with an L, a lame, and that's a tool that has a handle to it but with a razor blade on the end, so it's very sharp, and it allows you to make your own cuts. Some people you'll see become very creative and are very good at doing lovely designs. As a beginner, I highly recommend that you simply just make sort of maybe one half semicircle cut or a cross on top of the bread. What I'm going to do is just make a very basic cross, and I've floured this on top, and I've floured my little paring knife here just so that nothing sticks. So all you have to do is take your sharp paring knife or your lame and start gently working your way across the top of your dough and make the cross. Try not to pull it or drag it. That's why the lame is very popular, because it's such a sharp razor blade that it very easily cuts into the dough. But you can do it with a sharp paring knife too, so I don't want you to worry. Just try to use sort of the tip of the knife and just move across very gently, not in any way pulling the dough. You don't want to do, or putting any pressure. You don't want to deflate it. You just want to gently make your mark to allow the steam to escape. Now I'm going to go ahead and get my Dutch oven out of the oven. Now this is going to be piping hot, so be very careful. When you pick up the lid, first of all, I want to mention, put it down onto a heat-proof surface. I just use an old cotton pot holder that works great. But if you have some other type of heat-proof surface, that's fine too. Now, open the pot away from you because steam may escape. Alrighty. Now, let me put this down over here. Very hot. This is where the parchment paper comes in very handy. We're going to go ahead and we're going to pick up our dough, and we're going to put that right down into our Dutch oven. Okay, now that we've got that in the Dutch oven, we're going to use our pot holder and we're going to put the lid on, and we want to make sure that when we put the lid on that we have all of the parchment paper tucked in. And yes, we do. Now we're going to go ahead and put this back into the oven, and we're going to put it on the middle shelf right where we had it set when we were preheating the oven, but we want to lower the heat to 475 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're going to bake that bread at 475 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. And at 30 minutes, we're going to open the oven, remove the lid, and let the bread continue baking without the lid on. Well, this no-knead sourdough bread looks glorious. This was in the oven covered for 30 minutes at 475 degrees Fahrenheit. And then after 30 minutes, I removed the lid and let it bake uncovered for just a few more minutes. It really didn't need very much. It already was a nice golden brown when I took the lid off. So now I'm going to carefully, the parchment paper has cooled a bit with the lid off, and it's sitting here on my board so I can lift it up. But be careful, because initially the parchment paper will still feel warm. Now I'm just going to let this sit here for a few minutes. I think I can touch it. Yeah, it's cooled off a little bit. I'm just going to move that parchment paper out of the way, and I'm going to let this cool, and we'll slice it and we'll see how the interior came. Now this bread definitely looks very well done to me, but if you're new to baking, all you need to do is put it up on its side and tap it on the bottom. And I'll lean in so hopefully you can hear this with the mic. Hear that? Nice hollow sound. Means it's well baked and it's finished. Well, I let this cool about 20 minutes. It's still warm, but let's just go ahead and slice it and see how it turned out. Oh, listen to that. It sounds wonderful. Oh, look at this. Oh, it is quite warm, but look at how beautiful this bread came. Well, I know you're going to be so pleased with how this bread turns out. It's got a wonderful crisp exterior, yet the interior is so soft, so light, not dense in the least. So I think you're going to love doing the stretch and fold to get this lovely texture if you've had some problems with no-knead sourdoughs in the past. Well, now let's put some butter on this and give it a taste. Well, I've got some softened butter here because we gotta have some butter on this type of bread. Alrighty, let's give this a taste. Mmm. 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 That is such a delicious bread. This is not the least bit dense. You're going to be so pleased with this. Now, if you want to learn more about sourdough bread baking, including how to make a foolproof sourdough starter, be sure to click on this video over here, where I have a full playlist not only for how to make sourdough starter, but a whole host of sourdough breads. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.